Well, we're joined by a fantastic panel. Peter Schiff, the president of Euro-Pacific Capital. Lakshman Achutan is the managing editor of the Economic Cycle Research Institute. And Jim Ellis is the assistant managing editor of Business Week. Thanks to all of you for being here. I want to start with you, Peter. You have been writing about and describing a coming crash and recession for some years now. I hate to say that some of the things that you've written about, as outlandish as they seem, do seem to be bearing out right now.
Sure. You know, the problem, too, a lot of the jobs that are now being destroyed in our economy never should have been created in the first place. They were a function of our bubble economy, of the fact that Americans were borrowing money and spending too much. And as they can no longer spend because we're broke, all these phony service sector jobs are going to have to disappear. And as painful as it is for the people who are in those jobs, the government has to stand aside and let it happen. We can't try to keep people in non-viable jobs. We need to go back to making things, and it's going to be a very painful process. And Americans are going to have to rein in their spending and start saving money.
I just want to ask you one thing, and I know this is theory that you've worked on, but we're now talking about officially close to 2 million jobs lost this year alone, and it could be substantially more. I've heard you say it will need millions of job losses to set this economy straight. What is the real equation there for people? What does your science and your academia tell you that real people are supposed to do? 5 million people are unemployed.
Look, it's not my science. It's just how markets work. It's capitalism.
Yeah, but don't we have an obligation as a nation, as a modern economy, to make sure that 5 million people aren't living in tents?
There's nothing that we can do. You know, the government can't create jobs. They're going to destroy jobs trying to do it. The government doesn't have any money. All they have is a printing press. We need the free market to create jobs. If the government wants to help, they should reduce their burden on the economy. We should be cutting government spending. We should be cutting taxes. We actually should be raising interest rates. We're doing all of the wrong things,
listen,
and we're going to destroy this economy.
Nobody is talking about doing any of those things. You're right. I mean, and nobody's. And so what they're talking about doing is spending a whole lot of money in fiscal stimulus, and we've got the Federal Reserve doing everything that it possibly can to keep the economy afloat.
But they're not going to keep it going. Remember, we're in trouble because we borrowed and spent too much money. We're not going to borrow and spend our way out of it. We have to do the opposite of what we've been doing. We are simply digging ourselves into a deeper hole right now.
Lakshman, we're not doing what Peter says we should be doing, and no one says we're going to do that. What are we doing, and will it work?
Well, the one thing we're doing is we're probably cutting taxes, which is, I think, one of the things you were prescribing. But what we are doing here is they're throwing an ungodly amount of money at the economy. Not only the U.S., all of the major economies in the world are doing this. Even China is doing it in a coordinated way.
And you're a proponent of the idea that will ultimately work.
Well, look, what this is going to do is it's going to mitigate, to a degree, the pain on the way down. We are in a severe recession. As you were pointing out, this economy went from a mild recession to a very, very severe recession. The numbers today, they don't tell you anything about the future. They just tell you that a few weeks ago, we really accelerated to the downside. Now, when you look at the forward-looking indicators on the business cycle, they don't look years ahead, they look quarters ahead. They are tanking. They are at the worst readings they've been at in 60 years. So we've got more numbers like we saw today, or on Friday, coming in the months ahead. And in order, the one thing, the business cycle, the sharper the downturn, it tends to beget a sharper upturn. All of the things that we're doing here in the desperation of the moment are going to create all kinds of big questions on the other side in terms of the ideology of free markets, inflation, and other things, printing presses with the currencies.
But Jim Ellis says it's too soon to start worrying about that, right? I mean, we are facing the beast that we're facing right now, and then somewhere down the road there'll be a recovery and a bubble that'll have to be popped again. But what are we doing right now, and will it work?
Well, right now we basically have to find ways to free up the credit markets, get people to lend again, and as bad as we ran into trouble with people borrowing a lot and spending, we've got to get people spending again. That is something that I think some people, particularly sort of fiscal conservatives, really worry about. But that's a bubble to come. That's next year's fight or the fight after. Right now, the only thing to do is to get money coursing back through the economy, and that's going to be a real challenge for the new president, given that we're talking about doing that and basically accepting deficits that we haven't seen in years.
Hold on, Peter. We're going to have this discussion in a way where our viewers can understand how they fit into it. This is a very smart discussion. You need to know how this affects you. Now, the big buzz this week has been about the auto industry and whether or not to give it a bailout loan that is worth billions of dollars. All right, we're joined again by Jim Ellis, Peter Schiff, and Lakshman Achutan to continue our conversation. Obviously, Bob Nardelli making his case for the bailout, for a loan to the auto industry. Jim, let's start with you. What's your view on where this is?
In a word, yes or no? Do they get a bailout?
Verdict.
No.
In a word, yes. I mean, there's a political dimension here. I mean, we can talk about whether from an economic standpoint this is wise or not, but let's face it, this is a decision that's going to be made in Washington. And even though we're talking about $34 billion in the world of what we've given away over the last couple of months, we are talking about a rounding error. And also a rounding error that has quite a lot of legislators who would like to see this happen, even though the public polls lately have sort of moved against it. But if you look at dealerships alone, you're talking about employment in a lot of towns around this country that probably does go more than 500,000. So a lot of people want to keep their jobs
Peter
there.
Schiff, just because we've already spent an awful lot of money, does it mean that it's right to spend more money?
No, I mean, my mother always taught me that two wrongs don't make a right. We shouldn't have bailed out Wall Street. We shouldn't bail out Detroit. And it's going to cost the economy a lot more than the cost of the bailout, which is going to be a lot more than the politicians think. We're going to run into the hundreds of millions to prop these companies up. But the real cost is the damage to the economy that we do, because by propping it up, what are we destroying? What jobs are going to be destroyed? What companies are going to fail so that these can stay in business?
Jim made the point, and a lot of these congressmen have been making the point that there are dealerships across the country and there are plants. Lakshman, let's talk about around the country. Let's talk about, you've got a map that you can show us how things have changed.
Sure. Well, I mean, basically, as this recession has taken hold, job losses have gone from the coast and they've squeezed into the middle of the country. And this is how a recession works. It becomes more and more pervasive.
When you look back at January, for instance, it looked like
it was pretty mild.
Yeah, I mean,
you have a sea of blue, and we have
the
blue.
red is the red of the problem areas.
The red of the problem areas, and it's no mystery that California is in trouble, and they're really screaming right now.
And you can see Michigan was in trouble back then.
Yeah, these are the ones that were on the early edge of it. Yeah. And then as the recession has taken hold over the course of the year, you've seen job losses just really cover the map.
Let's advance that to October.
And so you see they're squeezing in. I think we're having a little bit of a delayed holdout in the middle of the country from the commodity bubble, both farm prices and oil prices. But basically, the recession has fully gripped this country, and you're seeing that in the latest data. There is a very pervasive job loss. It's regional and it's industry-wide. And this is what a recession is. And so in the middle of that, right, ideological arguments that have merit aside, do you want to put a slug of people out of work right there? And if you do, you are going to go from what's a severe recession. People act surprised by this number today. I mean, get over it. If you look at the forward numbers, they're going to get a lot worse.
The thing is, people are going to get put out of work. There's nothing we can do about it. But what government policy is doing now is making sure that there's no new jobs waiting for them. We have to let the market work. We can't think that we can centrally plan the economy and have the bureaucrats in Washington trying to figure out how to run the economy, how to make this whatever green economy, how to micromanage the auto industry. It's never worked. It didn't work in the Soviet Union.
All of that is a nice discussion before you get into a severe global recession.
Tell me about it. Jim started by saying this is ultimately going to be a decision made in Washington.
Yeah.
American people would like to know whether the government can help or will help.
Well, the government undoubtedly can help. The question is whether they are going to want to, sort of shoulder the financial burden that goes with that.
With what money?
And I have a feeling that the same way that the government has come in and come up with really innovative ways to pump money into the financial system to make sure we have a banking system, they're going to say that something like manufacturing still does matter in the U.S. It's very difficult to imagine a modern society that's a leader society and economically that doesn't have a manufacturing base.
That's a point that Peter's going to agree with you on.
Well, we're going to have to do it, but the solution is we have to save our money. Remember, he's talking about we need spending. When you're overweight, the solution isn't that you eat more.
Right.
When you're broke, the solution isn't to spend more. If we're going to have manufacturing in this country, we have to stop spending money. We need savings to supply the capital.
If people don't spend.
No, we'll have a real economy. Now we have a phony economy.
Some of the excesses have already been corrected. Right. You've had home prices coming down. You've had a lot of jobs lost. You're already having some of that creative destruction already happening.
Yeah. Remember, spending is not an economy.
We got to leave it there, guys. But listen,
Peter
brings up a very good question that I think we've got to get to, and that is, where do you get the money? We borrow the money. We don't have the money, and that is a very good point, and that's part of this whole equation.
We have a webcast to go
borrow from who, and how do we pay it back?